I'm Michael Martinez, and you're listening to the SEO Theory Podcast. I wanted to just cover a few points today. Let me start off with something that I occasionally remind people in the SEO community. When you try to differentiate your presentations from some other innocuous presentations by saying this isn't theory, this is based on real experience or something like that, you just look stupid. Theory is an attempt to explain the known facts. If you're doing a presentation and you're going to explain how something works and why it works, according to your point of view, you are presenting theory. Okay, so basically you're lying to your audience, whether you're just blogging or doing an actual webinar or something. And you look really silly to those of us who understand what theory is. Some people actually try to differentiate themselves from the SEO theory community, and there's more than one blog that brands itself as a theoretical blog. But all we're doing is trying to explain the known facts as we understand them. And you're going to get some differentiation, some differences of opinion. But those of you who try to distinguish yourselves from the theorists, you just look dumb because you are theorists when you try to explain all this stuff. So I'm just going to move on. Another thing I want to talk about is tokens. The tokens and embeddings and vectors. The SEO community has latched on to this vocabulary, and I mean, overall, it's probably a good thing. The search engineers have tried to explain the technology that they're working with in very general terms. And of course, a lot of people, and that includes me, we go out and we read the patent filings and research papers and things like that. And there are plenty of research papers out there about large language models and machine learning, decision tree, techniques and stuff. And so you run into this terminology all the time. If you're going to read these papers or if you're going to talk about them, then you probably should know what a token is and what a vector is and how it works and all that. Unfortunately, a lot of the people who use these terms don't seem to know what they really mean. But so let's just take the basic process of indexing a web page for a search engine. Now everybody's talking about how they tokenize it. All that means is they're taking the words or portions of words and converting them into integer representations, they're mapping them to numeric values. So the word they have a dictionary somewhere in their system that says the word the is going to have an integer value of 476,239. And they're going to use that integer value in all their machine learning processes and anything that uses a vector as input. That includes transformers and other kinds of applications. And so tokenization itself doesn't really have any meaning or relevance for the search engine optimization experience. Web publishers don't need to know or care about what tokens are. What you need to know and care about is what are the words on your pages, because that's what they're tokenizing. And you need to think in terms of words on the page. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Vectors are not always what you think they are. There are some pretty complex vectors out there. A vector is basically a string of numbers or things that are used for a specific purpose. So you could take the same data and vectorize it in many different ways. The vectors would be different lengths, have different orders, different values, and it's all going to be meaningful to some application, but there is no core vector value to your content. And you don't need to think in terms of vectors and vector embeddings. It's just, again, it makes you look silly. Those of us who have been trained in the art, as they say, who've taken computer science courses, data science, information retrieval courses, anything that teaches you about how to do this stuff, how to use this stuff, we're all just kind of bemused at the way that the general SEO population talks about this stuff without any real comprehension of what it relates to. So just keep in mind, you don't need to use these terms to sound cool. You're more likely going to sound stupid. Moving on. So Google had a conference recently, and they talked about indexing signals, and of course the it was an interesting presentation. I wasn't there. I've only got what I see on the web to go by. That includes screen captures. Um, what they said was interesting. What they didn't say was also interesting. They have indirect ways of telling you things that a lot of people in the industry are not listening to. And, that includes all of us. We all miss something. That includes me, for those of you who want to do, what about ism. I don't catch everything on the first pass, but so this list of indexing signals, what they do use, what they don't use, you can boil it down to what they do use from that list: country, language, HTTPS protocol, core web vitals, follow links, the use of follow links, content recency and freshness, and spam policy violations. There's nothing new in this list. Okay, these are just confirmed signals that they're using for indexing. And again, that's indexing, not ranking. These are not the only signals they use for indexing. They were just confirming. Well, they were going through a bunch of SEO proposed signals, and most of them are not used. And I'm not going to get into that. So, what is it that they didn't say that they kind of confirmed in other presentations or other parts of the presentation? Well, words on the page. They're indexing words on the page. And, when they talk about tokenizing your main content, that centerpiece that SEOs have latched onto, they're talking about words on the page. And again, that's how you need to think about this stuff. When you're talking to your stakeholders, your customers, or your corporate executives, your bosses, whoever is not deep in the weeds in this SEO stuff, and you're trying to explain to them how it works and why you're doing certain things, you really need to bring it down to the simplest level possible. You've got to put the words on the page that you want to appear in the search indexes, or the other features. And that's what Google keeps telling people: just put the words on the page. So the SEO industry should use that phrase far more often than they use phrases, words like tokens and vectors and vector embeddings. It has more meaning when you talk about the words on the page. You don't know how stuff is being vectorized by a search engine. You don't know how many large language models, or whatever other machine learning processes they're using to process that content, or how they're representing it. So you're getting in way over your heads. No matter how well trained you are, how much experience you have. You could take former Googlers like Pedro Diaz, and ask them to, if they could break it down and explain how it all is processed, word by word and all that stuff, and they're going to tell you they can't. They don't know, because there's just so much software processing all this stuff. The human mind simply can't think of it all. So conceptually, you're way in over your head, because they're way in over their heads, and they used to work with these systems. So the last point I want to get into is a question that's coming up: do we need new metrics for SEO, or are they necessary? And the answer to that, the short answer to that, is a qualified yes. New things are appearing in the search results, and therefore new things need to be quantified. And we need to do a few new things, so far as we know, in order to connect to these new things that are appearing in the search results. So therefore, yeah, you need to measure some stuff in a different way. But what I'm hearing, not only from the SEO community, but from business leaders, is this growing concern that the old way of doing SEO is no longer necessary or helpful or as beneficial as it once was, and that's utter nonsense. You can't get into the AI overviews, or other stuff, if your content isn't being selected and ranked for these queries. The AI overviews, literally, just most of what it's using there is stuff that's in the search results, and it's going to prefer the higher quality stuff to the lower quality stuff. So if you've got 500 listings in a search result for a query, some of that stuff's going to be lower quality than the other stuff. And what they mean by quality with respect to what's selected by AI overviews is quite possibly different from what they mean by quality, say just for being indexed. So you have to understand that there are a lot of things that they're not telling us that we're not going to be able to infer from API documentation and code leaks or whatever it is that you find randomly on the web, and you think you can intuitively reverse engineer Google's search algorithm from. That's not going to happen. So you need to be really conservative in terms of thinking about the value of traditional SEO. The 10 blue links did not go away. They're simply being joined by other things on the page, and AI reviews is one of them. And these other answer engines. I'm going to call them answer engines. I like that better. Chat GPT, Perplexity, all that. They either have their own search indexes or they're going back out to Bing and Google. And it doesn't matter if they use Bing or if they use Google. They're still running queries against these search engines and pulling the search results. And the higher the quality the content, the more likely it's going to be relied upon if it's relevant to whatever the prompt is that the answer engine is responding to. You are going to get irrelevant stuff in search results. The search engines are not perfect. They're probably never going to be perfect. And every search result is going to include irrelevant stuff. Hopefully, the answer engines are ignoring the relevant stuff. Now, we all know that they hallucinate, they get stuff wrong, they pull the wrong stuff, they don't answer questions correctly or completely. And so, but that's just for a mixture of reasons. And what you have to do is you have to understand you're still doing the same old SEO that you always were doing. It should be good SEO. You should be putting the proper words on the page, organizing them correctly, not, as they say, over optimizing. Don't rely too much on links. Yes, links matter. Links have always mattered, but it's not all about links. It never has been all about links. Spam. Uh, is built on links. Spam's also built on words on the page. The main difference between spam and what's acceptable is the degree of excess to which you take these practices. So, to wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about a list of proposed new metrics that Duane Forrester put out on Search Engine General and in his Substack, Search Engine Land, and his Substack a few weeks ago. I'm not going to go through them all. I'll probably go through them all in the SEO Theory Premium newsletter. But um, some of the things, these ideas that he's proposed, they're pretty interesting. Uh, but some of them are very abstract, and I'm not sure where Dwayne is going uh, with them. Some of them, they might be easy to misinterpret, like chunk retrieval frequency. When I first saw that, I thought, well, you're not going to get the same chunk every time. An AI thing answers, uses your content. So why would you want to measure that? Well, that wasn't what he was talking about. He's talking about at the higher aggregate level. How often your content is retrieved at the chunk level. So if you're appearing 5,000 times a month, it doesn't matter how many of those 5,000 times an individual chunk appears in one of these AI answers. What he's suggesting is that you just want to know how often. Well, this one is retrieval, so it's not even appear, but he just wants to know how often your stuff is being retrieved. I'm not sure that there's a lot of value in that because query trends change over time. People are going to get interested in something. It's going to spike or grow, or it might follow some kind of a wave pattern. And if you're trying to measure the frequency of how often your stuff is retrieved, assuming you can even measure that, you're going to get some false signals or some false patterns in there. It's not going to be very useful. It's not going to tell you, oh, we've increased the rate of retrieval for our content by rewriting it this way. You don't know that because it doesn't depend only on where your content is located and how it's written. It depends in part on other things in the search engine's algorithms and also on what people are searching for. That goes back to the searchable web ecosystem, which consists of three participants. You have searchers, you have publishers, and you have indexers. None of that's changed in the last 25, 30 years. I mean, ever since the first search system was developed, probably for library systems in the 1950s. You had your publishers, your indexers, and your searchers. And that's probably never going to change. It's just the means of search and indexing will be refined over time. Embedding relevance score. The way Duane described this was vector similarity between query and content, core to being matched in vector databases. I have no idea what he has in mind here, but again, I'm going to remind you, you don't know how your content is being represented internally by the search engine. Now it's all vectorized. That it should go without saying that it's all vectorized. They have to do that for algorithmic reasons, but also it's just a more efficient way to store stuff. The word supercalifragilisticexpialidocious is vectorized into an integer, and it's not going to be as long as that uh, to represent it. And that's the whole point of representing stuff numerically in these databases. It saves on storage. And it's faster processing too because well, you don't have to. I don't want to get into that. No, it's just easier to process integers or numbers than it is to process strings of data. Um, there's some of these other metrics. They're actually being used now by certain systems, tools, SEO tools, and they're beginning to prove their usefulness or their lack of usefulness. And so you certainly want to consider looking at some of these tools. They're not all going to be cheap, but you don't have to necessarily um, do that yet because everything is in chaos. It's all the search engines, the answer engines, they're all exploring what their users want and how best they can respond to them. And they're changing things pretty quickly. And the SEO tools are lagging way behind for the most part on measuring all this stuff. And, you know, interpreting the measurements that we have is kind of a gut feeling at this point. It's good to see your domain name or your brand name show up in a lot of these answers and stuff and things, but how does that translate into increasing sales? There's no straight, simple, forward answer for that. And you need to keep in mind that the end goal of all this for a business is to bring in more customers or more sales to retain customers. If you have a repeating, customer business model, for the rest of us, it, who are not directly selling something, you're talking about subscriptions, you're talking about just getting people to read your thoughts or whatever, to use your online databases, then you're going to have to think in terms of community, which is the way we've supposedly been thinking all along anyway. I mean, going back to the 1990s, we thought in terms of community, and we built those communities through mailing lists, through on page commenting, uh, through features that we don't use anymore because they were spammed to death. But community has always been a part of the web publishing process. I don't even want to call it web marketing. Sure, marketers think in terms of building community, but publishers think in terms of building community. You can write for an audience of one, that's your community, or you can write for an audience of millions. Either way, you're writing for a community. And if you don't think in terms of do how does my community relate to what I'm saying, then all this other technical stuff really doesn't matter because you're just wasting your time and your effort. So that's today's food for thought.